It began as a holiday. Eager to escape a bright future on the Great Plains, Arthur Howitzer Jr. transformed the series of travelogue columns into the French Dispatch.
In 1975, legendary magazine The French Dispatch of the Liberty, Kansas Evening Sun is printing its last issue after the death of editor Arthur Howitz Jr. That's a jumping-off point for a dive into the magazine's wild past, in the form of 3 stories. The relationship between an incarcerated artist, his muse and his agent, a love affair between an older reporter and a young protester during student riots, and a food review turned police stakeout. The French Dispatch is set in the fictional town of Ennui, introduced in a brief opening segment with Owen Wilson. That places it in a particular canon of Anderson films, along with The Darjeeling Limited and Isle of Dogs, in that it's a film about a place that isn't America. More like the latter, Isle of Dogs, than the former. The depiction of France in The French Dispatch is basically a caricature. I mean, despite Anderson living there for much of his adult life, we're looking at a cartoon sketch of the place, set in a made-up city named after a French word that most English-speaking audiences will know. Whether you find that charming or insulting will predict your reaction to most of the rest of the film. Now, anthology movies can be a bit taxing on both the viewer and the reviewer because they require a lot of recap. And adding to that issue, Anderson's document madness that's run through all of his movies escalates even further in this film. Characters aren't just sending each other cutesy letters anymore. The very structure of the story itself is communicated through documents of various types. Benicio del Toro's Tortured Artist is narrated through a framing lecture delivered by Tilda Swinton years later, and Jeffrey Wright's food writing is recited verbatim during a TV interview way after the fact. A large chunk of that story actually is also told through a comic book adaptation of its already historically distant events. Throughout all of these shifts, aspect ratios change, lengthening or compressing the image, and more bewilderingly, I think, the film changes regularly between black and white and colour, sometimes shot to shot, sometimes during the same sequence, with no discernible reason. Now, aesthetic distancing devices are nothing new for Anderson. I mean, how much more obvious can you be with your distancing when your trademark is a wide-angle lens? But in this case, they distance the viewer from the actual story itself, from the literal telling of it, not just the subtext. For me, this is the most interesting and freshest aspect of the film by far. Your mileage may vary, just like it did on Ennui itself. Look, it's a Wes Anderson movie, right? He's been doing them for years. He successfully built a brand around taking the charming bits of the 90s indie film scene and making it look like a stellar advert for the Tumblr generation. We all know it, and some of us even like it. I'm hit and miss with his stuff personally. I find it a bit weird that a large portion of the film criticism world fawns over this guy who mostly directs adverts and writes reductive movies about another culture based off his favourite New Yorker articles. But hey, it's a Wes movie, and what I'm saying is, you know what you're getting. For me, I like it when there's something underneath all of that style, and preferably not just a sad dad figure. The Grand Budapest Hotel, to me, represents all that Wes Anderson can promise, using a cavalcade of aesthetic approaches to mask this moving story about totalitarianism and its impact on human lives. The big trouble with The French Dispatch is that despite all the lovingly rendered documents, the big name cast, the baguettes and onions and striped shirts, underneath it all, there's not really much there. Wright's story carries this core moment of beautiful pathos, but the telling of it's too whimsical to really land. Del Toro's story might be emotional, but we aren't given enough time to appreciate it because of the anthology structure. And the middle story, with the boy himself, Timothee Chalamet, is more of a whisper than a bang. It's a Wes movie, yes, but Wes has moved into his decadent phase, running out of fresh ideas, reproducing and reinterpreting his own, parodying himself without seemingly realising it. So that's The French Dispatch, but I know Wes Anderson has his fans, and boy are they diehard, so let's have that debate in the comments below. I'd love to see what you thought about this movie. And hey, if you didn't know, I have a Patreon that supports indietrix, so if you enjoyed this review, if you like the fact that it's impartial and doesn't have adverts for shaving equipment or like subscription boxes that give you vegetables, then please head on over and consider supporting me on Patreon. It costs about as much as a coffee. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.